You know that feeling when your phone buzzes with another group invitation? Maybe it's drinks after work or a weekend birthday party or just someone asking if you want to catch up soon. And instead of excitement, you feel drained. Like the idea of showing up and being on for 3 hours sounds genuinely exhausting. And then you decline and you're relieved, but there's this nagging voice that says, "What's wrong with you? Why don't you want what everyone else seems to want?" If you're sitting there thinking, "Wait, that's me," welcome, you're about to feel very seen. Here's the thing, you probably have fewer friends than most people, maybe significantly fewer. Maybe you have 2 or 3 people you actually talk to. Maybe you haven't texted anyone in weeks. And society has taught you to interpret this as a problem, as loneliness, as social failure, as something you need to fix. But what if you're not lonely at all? Psychologists make a critical distinction that most people completely miss. There's loneliness, which is painful, which is your brain screaming that you need connection you're not getting, and then there's chosen solitude, which is comfortable, voluntary aloneness. And here's what's wild. Research shows these two things are completely independent. You can be surrounded by people and feel desperately lonely, or you can spend a Saturday night alone reading in your apartment and feel perfectly content. The UCLA Loneliness Scale, which is basically the gold standard for measuring this stuff, doesn't ask how many friends you have, it asks how often you feel understood, how often you feel like there are people you can turn to, how often you feel left out. Because it turns out the number of people in your life has almost nothing to do with whether you're actually lonely. Let me ask you something. Would you rather have 50 acquaintances who know your name and your job title, or 2 friends who actually understand how your mind works? Would you rather have a packed social calendar where you're performing all the time, or 3 hours alone where you can finally just exist? If you picked the second option both times, you're not weird, you're just built different. Here's what nobody talks about. People who prefer small social circles or no social circle at all beyond maybe 1 or 2 deep connections, they're not avoiding intimacy, they're actually seeking a specific kind of intimacy that large groups can't provide. Studies on personality psychology show that people who are comfortable with solitude tend to score higher in a few key areas. They're more intrinsically motivated, meaning they don't need external validation to feel okay about themselves. They have stronger internal compasses. They know who they are when nobody's watching. And honestly, that's not a deficit. That's emotional independence.
Think about someone you know who constantly needs to be around people. Not because they love connection, but because being alone makes them anxious. They'll scroll through their contacts looking for anyone to hang out with. They'll say yes to invitations they don't even want just to avoid an empty Friday night. That's not connection, that's avoidance. That's using other people like an emotional support system because sitting with yourself feels unbearable. Now, think about someone who can spend an entire weekend alone without feeling like something's missing, who can sit with their own thoughts without needing constant distraction or validation. That person has learned something powerful, how to emotionally self-regulate, how to be okay in their own company. Psychologists call this distress tolerance, and it's actually a sign of psychological health. Wild, right? But here's where it gets interesting. Research suggests that people who are comfortable with solitude often form deeper bonds when they do connect, because they're not connecting from a place of neediness or desperation. They're not trying to fill a void. They're choosing connection from a place of wholeness, and that fundamentally changes the quality of the relationship. They invest selectively. They don't scatter their emotional energy across dozens of surface-level friendships. They go deep with the people who actually matter. And because they're not dependent on constant social interaction to feel stable, they maintain better boundaries. They don't lose themselves in relationships. They don't bend themselves into shapes to keep people around. Here's something that might hit hard. A 2018 study analyzing data from over 30,000 adults found that some people who were socially isolated, meaning they had few friends, limited social contact, reported very low levels of loneliness and functioned perfectly well. Their health was fine, their mental health was fine, they weren't suffering, they were just living differently. And the researchers concluded that the need for social connection is way more variable than we've been taught to believe. Some people genuinely need lots of social interaction to thrive, others don't. Neither is healthier, they're just different nervous systems with different requirements. Now, here's where we need to be honest. There's another piece to this. Solitude isn't just emotionally neutral. For some people, it's actually cognitively beneficial. Einstein once said, "I live in that solitude which is painful in youth, but delicious in the years of maturity." And there's neuroscience behind this. When your brain isn't processing social stimulation, reading facial expressions, managing social dynamics, performing appropriate responses, it has bandwidth for something else. Studies on creativity show that people who spend more time alone often engage in more divergent thinking, which is basically your brain making unusual connections, exploring ideas without social pressure to conform. It's why so many writers, scientists, and artists describe needing long stretches of solitude to do their best work. Their brain isn't distracted by the constant input of other people's needs and reactions. They can follow their thoughts wherever they lead, without worrying about whether someone else will find it weird. Translation: fewer friends might actually mean more cognitive freedom. Okay, but before you think I'm romanticizing isolation, let me be clear. There's a crucial distinction here that we need to talk about.
Type 1, you have few friends because that genuinely matches your emotional needs. You feel content. You're not avoiding connection, you're just selective about it. When you're alone, you feel peaceful, not anxious. You have a rich internal life. You can reach out when you need to. You're choosing this. Type 2, you have few friends because you've learned to cope with chronic loneliness by convincing yourself you don't need people. Maybe you were rejected a lot. Maybe social situations are genuinely scary because of anxiety or past trauma. So you've built walls and called it preference. When you're alone, you actually feel empty or numb, but you've taught yourself not to notice. Both exist, and honestly, only you know which one you are. But here's the question worth asking yourself. Are you choosing solitude, or are you hiding in it? Because here's what research does show very clearly. Chronic perceived isolation, meaning you feel lonely, you feel disconnected, regardless of how many people are technically in your life, that has real consequences. Studies link long-term loneliness to cognitive decline, to changes in behavior and sleep, to cardiovascular problems. Your nervous system interprets social isolation as a threat, and when that signal is constant, it affects your body. So the number of friends doesn't matter. What matters is alignment. Does your social life, whatever it looks like, match what you actually need? If you have 2 friends and you feel fulfilled, you're good. If you have 2 friends and you're actually aching for more connection but you're scared to pursue it, that's different. That might be something worth exploring. Not wrong, not broken, just different, and maybe worth understanding more deeply. Let me tell you what people who thrive with few or no friends tend to have in common. They have strong internal compasses. They know what they value without needing group consensus. They're comfortable with introspection. They can examine their own thoughts and feelings without it feeling threatening. They have clear self-concepts. They know who they are. And they have what psychologists call high emotional resilience, meaning they can handle discomfort and uncertainty without immediately reaching for external support. These aren't antisocial people. They're often deeply emotionally intelligent. They're just wired to need less frequent social input to feel regulated. Think of it like a social diet. Some people need 3 meals a day plus snacks. Other people do better with intermittent fasting. Neither is wrong. Your nervous system just has different requirements based on your personality, your upbringing, your neurobiology. And trying to force yourself into someone else's social rhythm is like trying to force yourself to be hungry when you're not. It just creates stress. So, what does this mean for you? It means that if you're someone who feels genuinely content with a small circle or no circle at all beyond maybe 1 or 2 people you deeply trust, you're not missing out. You're not socially deficient, you're not immature or avoidant or broken. You've just figured out what your nervous system actually needs, and you're living in alignment with that instead of performing what society says you should want. And here's the kicker. The people who judge you for having few friends, a lot of them are surrounded by people and still feel completely alone.
They're collecting relationships like trophies while feeling fundamentally unseen. You're not doing that. You're being honest about what actually nourishes you. Human connection exists on a spectrum. On one end, you have people who need constant social contact, who get energy from crowds, who feel most alive when they're surrounded by others. On the other end, you have people who need long stretches of solitude, who feel most like themselves when they're alone, who connect deeply with just one or two people, and that's enough. Most of us fall somewhere in between. And neither end of that spectrum is healthier. What makes you healthy is knowing where you fall and building a life that honors that, instead of fighting it. The next time someone asks why you don't have more friends, or why you're not more social, or why you'd rather stay home than go out, you don't owe them an explanation. But if you want one for yourself, here it is. You're not avoiding connection, you're rejecting the terms. You're saying that depth matters more than breadth, that peace matters more than performance, that being understood by 2 people means more than being known by 50. And that quiet person who prefers solitude, they're not hiding in the shadows. They're just living in a light where cameras can't reach. If this hit home for you, please like the video. And if you want to support these deep dives into what makes us human, hit that subscribe button to become a channel member. I would genuinely appreciate it.